This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane and Olgun here. Just a couple of days after the Illawarra Hawks close out Game 5 on their home floor. They win their second ever title in the NBL, and it was a really incredible day in the Gong, an incredible game, and an end to an incredible series. Kane and Olgun on a Tuesday morning. Olgun, by the way, it's 7:30 a.m. as we record this, so respect to you. I requested you get up early, and you said, look, this is the last pod for the season, so I'm going to get up early for you and break down everything we saw. We're going to get to what we saw in Game 5. We're going to get to some big picture storylines as well. And yes, of course, we'll get to the MVP, Olgun, which has been a big talking point out of this series. But man, what a game. I've said it a billion times this season, but I was jealous you were there in the building, and it just seemed like a crazy day overall. And of course, congrats to Illawarra.
Yeah, so it was weird. Going into the game, there was a lot of tension in the days leading up to it. But then as soon as I got to the Gong, and I drove through some very thick fog to get there, that was dangerous as hell. But as soon as you got in the building, that tension sort of eased a little bit. There was like the energy sort of subsided to where everyone felt a little bit more relaxed. And I think that was like the energy in the building. And then there was like a string of Melbourne United supporters who walked in about an hour before tip-off. And there was about 30 of them, all dressed in blue, some wearing like funny hats and stuff. And they were sort of chanting on their way in. And I think you could see like pockets of Illawarra fans just sort of wake up and be like, oh, okay, we have something to compete with. This is very fun. This is good. And it was sort of like a little, like a Timu version of like a EuroLeague crowd, where there was finally like a rivalry feel to it. Now, it's not like a real rivalry on the court, whatever, but like the fans finally felt that way. And then you could feel it throughout the entire game. That crowd was insane. That every single beat, every missed call, every suspected travel, every bucket, they were cheering, they were boos. It was as loud as I've ever heard that arena, and I've been to games in that building for the past like half decade.
Yeah, you know this, and a bunch of our listeners that have been in similar buildings understand it as well. Sometimes you have a smaller building and it actually feels even more louder and more electric inside there. I think the attendance, I've got it here, yeah, 5,686. So, 5,600 people. It's not a big crowd. It's half what you get in at John Cain Arena, and yet it did on the broadcast seem even louder. This game tipped off, it was around midnight for me over here on Saturday night. So I was excited to tune into the pregame show and see my man Copes getting the job done there. And it was loud an hour before tip-off. But that's probably what you were talking about when that cheering started to begin. And I did wonder what that would do for the anxiety of the players, because no team had won at home coming into this game. And, I thought it was a pretty nervous start for Illawarra, particularly on the offensive end. You get 6 minutes into the first quarter, they've got 10 points on the board. But again, we discussed this on Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops. This is the question I posed to Ryan Brockhoff. Would you start Davo Hickey and bring Trey Kell off the bench? I thought you had to start Davo Hickey just purely for that energy. And again, he had 8 of those 10 points, and he was the guy that allowed this team to settle in again. What a series it was for him. He was incredible, and maybe you could make the case he saved his best for last in this Game 5.
Yeah, so there was weird. There were questions. So about, let's say, 2 hours before, there's still questions on whether Trey Kell would play. And I think everyone knew that they were definitely leaning toward him playing, and he was more than likely going to play. But then about an hour and a half, hour before tip, he started to warm up. It was probably even closer to tip, he started to warm up, but he didn't really look like completely loose. He was still sort of like gingerly going up and down the floor. As toward the end of his warm up, you can still he was starting to loosen up a little bit, feel himself a bit. But there were still questions from the Illawarra camp on, all right, like how do we implement him? How do we incorporate him into this game? Because David Hickey has been playing very well over the past couple of games. He's like that boost of energy. He's also the guy who's been sort of like guiding the pace for the Illawarra Hawks in both pushing the pace and also slowing it down. So Hickey had sort of established himself as that guy, and Trey Kell was coming off a game where he didn't play. So there were still questions about it, and I thought Justin Tatum and that Hawks team did a really good job of making sure David Hickey was there to make sure that the Hawks could absorb the first punch from United, and Hickey's energy was there, and then Trey Kell was able to come in and be the sort of elite creator scorer that he is. And he kept them ticking, and every time United went on a run, it felt like Trey Kell was there to hit a tough shot or to get to his spot in the mid-range. They played their respective roles super well.
Yeah, I mean, Trey, and this is what's always going to be a little bit of a mystery to me with Trey Kell is the fact that they said that he was so close in Game 4 with everything on the line, and he didn't play in that game. And I'm just scratching my head, going, "You got to be kidding me!" Even if he's close, you got to have one of your absolute superstar players on the floor. And then you say that he didn't look convincing pregame, and then I look and he played 31 minutes. So clearly it was an injury, and I know there would have been adrenaline and all different types of things, but 31 minutes for him, 26 points, 11 rebounds, 7 assists, one of his better games for the whole entire season. And that's why this is always, I would love to get them all off the record and ask them, why didn't you play Trey Kell in game 4? How concerned were you about playing? Because the numbers tell me and what we saw on the floor, this was an injury he could play through.
Yeah, the game 4 was a trade decision, from what I understand.
Crazy.
But it was weird. So I spoke with Trey Kell after the game, after game 5, and he said, "Look, adrenaline took over. Like it took over my whole body, and I was able to go out there and do what I do." Trey Kell has another contract he's going to as well, so he'll go straight into that. But you know what? It's really interesting when you look at Trey Kell as a player and what we see of him. There are some elements of him that can be a little bit like nonchalant, a little bit relaxed. Um, and especially when he gets injured, I think he can play them up a little bit. But he delivers in big moments, and he's done that consistently. And it's something that I don't even realize. You think obviously game 3 of the semifinal series, he
Yeah.
came up huge. Game 5 in this series. And then you look at his resume, he's 28 years old. He's won 4 titles across his time playing professional basketball around the world. So this is a guy who comes up who delivers in big moments. He wins championships. So this is again, as much as the way he can play can look a little bit relaxed, this is a guy who's won at a lot of different levels over the course of his career. So it shouldn't come as a surprise, as much as it did based on just like the little glimpses we see over the course of the season, that he came up big and led them to a championship. This is what Trey Kell does.
Yeah, the idea of responding is a good point you make because, maybe he plays in game 4 and then with those 3 or 4 days recovery, maybe he doesn't pull up well and can't play in game 5. So I don't know the details to be able to question it, but just to see him play so well in that game and just think, man, he could have just been sitting on the sidelines while they got eliminated in game 4 is always going to be fascinating to me. Here's what I would tell you this, and I know we're going to keep this big picture, and for Illawarra fans and Melbourne fans, we'll talk about both teams, and you're probably going to say we're jumping all over the place because we are, because I'm just thinking of things that are coming to my mind. But this Melbourne team is, you've said it, the word you've used is professional. I don't think they had a great series. And when you look at the time spent in front in this series and the periods of dominance, it really felt like Illawarra threw away moments more than Melbourne were able to actually be the better team in this series. So in the end, I think we clearly got the correct winner. But if I told you before this game 5 that Melbourne was going to be +7 in 3-point makes, not +7 in 3-point attempts, +7 in 3-point makes, and get this, +15 in free throw makes. Like, they lived at the free throw line in this game, and they were -7 in turnovers. They only had 5 team turnovers for this whole entire game. Like, those numbers alone, you would have thought Melbourne won this by 20 points. Like, there is no way with those particular numbers. If you look them up for the rest of the season, I almost guarantee you they have not lost a game if they have those differentials, if they had it at all, because all the main metrics that you would look at for how a team can score that doesn't have a firepower in offense, Melbourne, if I told you just those numbers, they should have won the game. So, man, they're going to walk away and think, geez, how did we actually lose that game of basketball?
So I haven't dug into the numbers in the same way that you have, but in my mind, I imagine rebounds, especially offensive rebound and after possessions, was a significant part of what Illawarra did, and points in the paint. I want to say points in the paint in game 5 was something along the lines of 60-30. And again, the eye test you watch, and they had a really tough time containing Locky Albbrick down low, Sam Froling earlier in the series, Dave O'Hickey when they put a big on him. It worked to an extent to start the series, and then Dave O'Hickey managed to find his spots, hit that in-between shot around the paint. That feels like that's what the Hawks did to counteract the 3-point makes, the free throw makes of Melbourne United. I imagine that's the case. I don't know if you've dug into the numbers as specifically as that either, though.
Yeah, the Hawks were +23 in rebounds, +9 in offensive rebounds. Dave O'Hickey had 5 of those rebounds. So that was a factor. Though I would argue points in the paint is a little bit challenging to count when you see that they had 45 free throw attempts. Like there's going to be a discrepancy there. I mean, if you're living at the free throw line, clearly you would have had some struggles there. But we've discussed the Illawarra Hawks defense a lot. And again, I don't think you're talking about a juggernaut Melbourne team that gets the ball in the paint and completely dominates you. But they were 44%. They were 15 for 34 in 2-point range. And out of those 2-point shots, only one of those came outside the paint. So this was a Melbourne team that could not score at all unless they were getting fouled going to the basket. I think part of that was physicality. I do think Illawarra was super disciplined defensively. And without Sam Frolin, this was highly impressive. Tatum, again, give him credit. He just has continued to go with what is working on the day. And let me ask you this. So Locky Albbrick in game 4 and game 5 played 25 plus minutes. How many games do you think for the rest of the season he played 25 plus minutes?
Oh, maybe 3.
Zero. Zero. So think about that. A 21-year-old, 6'10" big man did not play 25 plus minutes once in the whole entire series. And when it came down to game 4 and game 5, 2 games where if you lose, your season's done, Justin Tatum, yes, Frolin is part of that. But out of all the guys he could have lent on, he lent on the 21-year-old that has never played that amount of minutes for this team this season. And man, he delivered in a big way. He was so huge.
And you know what? Take the Frolin part out of it. Obviously, Frolling out meant that the minutes and usage for Ulrich would go up just necessarily.
Yeah.
But they were actively going down to him.
Yeah.
They were throwing the ball down low. They were running actions to get him in the paint and get him a look on the low block. They were throwing him the ball. I sit in my seat on the very corner. They were throwing him the ball practically at the 3-point line in front of me, so he can face up and take Marcus Lee or Rob Lowe or whomever is on him off the dribble. And yeah, I spoke with Dean Vickerman, a little bit after the game, a couple hours after, and he said, "Damn, like Locky Albbrick was really freaking good. He's awkward and he's like wiggly, but he makes those tough looks around the paint. His touch is awesome, and the underrated thing over the course of this season is his passing, because you go single coverage against Locky Albbrick, and Marcus Lee and Rob Lowe had no answer for it. Locky Albbrick was just he's just too dense. He's too skilled. He'll go through you, and then you send help. You send the help over, and the lineups that Tatum was playing, I think for the last 35 minutes of this game, were really balanced from like a shooting standpoint. So help comes, Todd Blanchfield is open. H.J. Lee gets open. Like Wani Swaka-Bullock in the corner. He had an awesome series, not just defensively on Chris Golding, but shooting the ball. So they went down low to Locky Albbrick, this 21-year-old, and he was practically unstoppable. He was unguardable. This Melbourne United team was a top 2 defense all season long practically. They're one of the best. They're over the last couple of years, probably the best defense we've seen.
Yeah.
And they got torn apart by this young kid who hadn't played much all season, but is obviously skilled. And I've asked people about this. If you ask around the league, how many teams would swap their starting center for Locky Albbrick? Like, I think a decent chunk of them would. And the Hawks haven't come off the bench.
Yeah, and that was the depth of this team. That's why I liked him so early, because they could have gone to Darius Days. As I said, he only played a couple minutes in this game. Mason Peatling was a guy there. He's been a relatively important depth piece in the championship team before, and then obviously the starter Sam Frolin, who is only 24, 25 years old, but has been playing in this league for a long time now. Like, he's a legitimate guy that looked like he was about to take a step, and obviously it's devastating for him. But I'm glad he still got his moment and had that massive game in this series leading into this one. Was it game 3, I believe, when they game 2 or game 3? So, Sam Frolin had his moments here. So really all the guys across the board. But just the last one on Albrecht, because I remember we spoke about it. We did podcasts after game 1 when Melbourne's up 1-0. We did podcasts after game 3 when it was 2-1. So we've constantly been in this cycle of Illawarra down. And, are they going to respond now? But after that game 1 podcast, I remember bringing it up on the show going, well, look, Albrecht only played 6 or 8 minutes in that game 1. And in those minutes, he was really damn good. And I wondered just in that opening moment whether there was some hesitation that, damn, he's young. He made like one mistake. And it's like, okay, we're gonna get him off the floor. And then whether it was by necessity or whether it was, Peatling struggled defensively, I think, in this series. Darius Days is an erratic type player. And they just said, hey, we think that we can see a weakness with the bigs at Melbourne United that constantly foul and get themselves in bad positions. We've got legitimately a top and I'm only saying top 2 or 3 because I haven't thought about this, maybe the number 1 post footwork guy in the league. Like, when you say why people say he's difficult to defend, it's because no one plays this way. No one does the stuff that Locky Albbrick does. He's like brings a tear to the eye, the guys that have played in the 80s, because this is what they're screaming for all the time. And when they say, "Hey, get the ball in the post, get this guy post up," the reason why I'm usually against it because the guys don't know how to score that way, but Locky Albbrick does, and they lent on.
Yeah, you ask around the league, everyone's got a different description for the way Locky Albbrick plays. You know, I've heard like wobbly, I've heard wiggly. I've spoken with Locky. He says he's floppy, just the way he carries himself. You overestimated that game one. He played 4 minutes.
There
Locky
you go.
Albbrick did,
Yeah,
and I
he
was
was like
like,
plus
after
8
that
or plus
game,
9, yeah.
you and I both called for he's a plus 10. Like, after again, you and I both said there should obviously be more Locky Albbrick minutes. And, you've got the Sam Froling minutes, you've got, like, the tendency to go small with, Darius Days at the 5, we saw Mason Peatling at the 5, and so I get it. It was really tough to, like, pick lineups, but it felt obvious that Locky Albbrick was someone who can go out there and create an advantage. So, I'm glad that obviously it was the worst of circumstances that led to him getting a ton of minutes and a ton of usage, with Sam Froling going down with an Achilles injury. But I'm glad he got his opportunity, and again, he's draft eligible. And if you're an NBA team and you're watching this dude not just do this against high level talent, but doing this in the highest stakes of an NBL season, that's so impressive. He did this in the New Zealand NBL over the course of the offseason. He's an elite player. He's not required to shoot the ball for this Illawarra Hawks team, but he can be a high level shooter at some point. There is like an obvious skill set there. So credit to him, and like obviously, I don't know if we've harped on it enough, but credit to Davo Hickey. He's someone who, over the course of the years, I haven't been like crazy high on. You see glimpses of talent, but it's like, can he put it together over the course of an entire game or over the course of a series or a season? And his last 2 games of this series were incredible. Dean Vickerman continued to go with the math and put the big man on him and test him. And I thought he did a really good job of pushing the pace, getting 2 feet in the paint, hitting that in-between shot, those little floaters. He hit that stuff with regularity. And again, every time it felt like the Hawks needed a lift, he was able to provide that energy. And it wasn't just energy. There was like an obvious skill set there. So big credit to him for stepping up in these moments. Because think back to last season, last playoffs. It was those two guys. It was Locky Albbrick, who got played off the floor, and it was Davo Hickey, who got played off the floor by Melbourne United in the semi-final series. And they both responded with, obviously, through development and growth over the offseason, and they redeemed themselves. It was awesome.
Yeah, if I can just say where I was way off in how I thought this series was going to be won. We discussed it a lot. I just think like you get to this time of year and time after time, year after year, every single series you win with your stars. And this is why this is such a unique title because, I would say Dave Hickey's a star now based on what he just did, 21 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists, and just consistently had the big moments. He was the guy that kept Illawarra alive in moments where they were really struggling, including in that game on the road to send them to game 4. He was the guy again. Like he just consistently did it. I'm curious what it looks like over a full season, but regardless, like this guy's an NBL legend forever based on what we saw in this series. Like that's the fact. You deliver that over a 5-game series, and the Hawks just didn't get the best of Tyler Harvey. Now he hit the game winner in game 2. He hit the dagger in game 4. So he had a couple of just monumental moments in this series, but he wasn't close to his best. And a lot of credit to specifically Ian Clark, but what Melbourne were able to do in denying Tyler Harvey. And it helps when Trey Kell was so far off the boil. So you didn't have Trey Kell anywhere near his best. I know he was big in game 5, but other than that, he was not really a factor in the series. And then you had Sam Froling for only 3.5 games, not even 3.5 games. Like it's a remarkable win. And if we just turn to Melbourne a little bit, how are they feeling? I don't know how many of those guys you've spoke to, but you think about the way they lost last year, and there was so many different things that happened. But the Jack McVeigh half-court shot is just insane. This year, they had a couple of moments, a couple of chances to basically bury the series on their home floor. They weren't able to do it. And ultimately, they just missed a massive opportunity against a team that their best players weren't playing well or they were severely undermanned. And they just didn't get the job done. Like, they blew this. And this is 2 years in a row now to lose in brutal fashion. And this was an older team. So, and I'm just curious what it looks like. They're always going to be good because they're Melbourne United. They'll get players in. They make smart decisions. But, man, it's going to be a tough few months here as they probably figure out what next year looks like.
Yeah, it's this feels different to last season. Last season was like utter disappointment, and there was like the desire for immediate redemption because a lot of the same guys were contracted and they were able to run it back to an extent. Whereas now it's everyone's a year older. I think toward the end of this series, a lot of the guys looked a little bit older, and guys are not contracted. Delhi's not contracted. Ian Clark is not contracted. And so you wonder, like, all right, like we've been to back-to-back game fives. What do we do with this? On paper, if you look at it, I don't know it's not how this works, but we're 2 possessions away from back-to-back titles here. Jack McVeigh shot and a Tyler Harvey shot, right? Obviously, you don't know what's going to happen after those games. If they had won those, do they lose or whatever, right? But like on paper, that's the way you feel emotionally, and so it's like, damn, like we don't want to change too much because we're right there. But with the age and with the contract situations, it is just natural to think that, all right, there's a lever that has to be pulled to get us over the edge. Last season, it was sort of bringing back a lot of the same, bringing Jack White in, some role-playing bigs, and work harder on end-of-game execution. That felt like the key. This time, there's a lot of whispers of like, man, like, do we need more athleticism? Do we need an athletic wing type to have in this lineup just to help us? Did we regret not having a better post target? Like, obviously Marcus Lee and Rob Lowe are elite in their own areas. Throughout the season they showed their glimpses, but these are both role players who are complementary to what the Stars do. But is it nice to have a target there who can draw attention? You think of back in the day, think of Ty Wesley, you think of Jock Landau, you think of JLA last year.
Yeah.
Like, these are the sort of, like, you're asking those granular questions because you're asking every question now because, man, back-to-back game fives is just a brutal thing. And it's a heartbreaking thing. And to watch those guys have to watch the celebration in front of the Hawks crowd, it's a brutal thing to have to do.
Yeah, and, we spoke about the Illawarra best players not getting it done. Like, it wasn't quite like that for Melbourne, but I think we did see over the course of 5 games, and maybe this wasn't the case, and maybe it was just coincidental in the way it played, and again, a lot of credit to the Illawarra defense, but, Daly and Ian Clark, maybe they did wear down a little bit towards the back end. They weren't quite as efficient offensively, particularly in this game. And Daly only has 6 shots, and he got to the free throw line a couple of times. Ian Clark 5 for 13, and it felt like he had such a great start to this postseason. He had that huge game 3 against Perth, but his minutes went up. His minutes went up a fair way, and I do wonder what that looked like. I don't know. I hear a lot about fatigue, though, I should say, and, they got 3 days off between every game. Like, this is a pretty light schedule, and you're only taking a 1-hour flight from Melbourne to Sydney. Like, it's not like this was a grueling schedule, particularly for those guys. But, yeah, I think there will be questions. And the other thing we should say, Illawarra offensively weren't quite at their best here. Melbourne deserves a lot of credit for that. This is an unbelievable defensive team. But the one thing we did learn from this year's NBL is that as good as defenses can be, you'll still stack up wins in the regular season, as Melbourne will, I suspect, do again next year. But the offenses are getting so much better, and the quality of player and the quality of shooting and the ability to score and the pace is up, that you do need athletes and you do need guys that can be explosive on the offensive end. And, a lot of this fell back down to Chris Golding, which does bring me to the MVP conversation. Let's get to it. Now, in the end, Daly is the Championship Series MVP, and that's the way it's going to go down in history, even though he had this unbelievable moment that went across the world where he got up on stage and handed it over to Dave O'Hickey. I would suspect the NBL's not too upset about it because, damn, this got a lot of coverage, including on our own ESPN and the Sports Center over here in the US. All those types of channels had a whole bunch of people asking me about it. But ultimately, I think there's only one answer to this. The system is wrong. When you are asking the voting panel, which you're a part of, so I'll ask you for your perspective. When you're asking the voting panel to vote 3-2-1 after every single game, then you're setting yourself up for failure. Now, most of the time, it generally works because you have got a guy that dominates a series. But when you get to a 5-game series to start it all, there are storylines that unfold right throughout the whole entire game. And you can't allow guys to finish 3rd or 4th in the MVP that have played one good game. And that's ultimately the way that this system sets it up to be. And Daly was unbelievable in this series. But I would have to imagine if you guys were just asked to give your MVP at the end of game 5, there is absolutely zero chance he wins it. And there is 100% chance that Dave Hickey gets it for everything that he did, because on the balance of the whole entire series, he was the MVP. So it's Daly was unbelievable, but he wasn't the MVP, and he knew that. And the system allowed this to happen, and it's a mistake, and it should change.
Yeah. All right. So we firstly all had to do a better job in informing people what the system was, because to this day, people still can't comprehend that that's what this system is. They still think that how dare Delhi be picked? The system that we were given, it's a game by game 3-2-1. It is the sort of system that benefits star players. It benefits like high production players. It doesn't necessarily benefit winning over the course of the series. Like it doesn't benefit the ultimate winner. And it doesn't benefit teams with depth. And that's what Illawarra is. And so when you have Melbourne, even when Melbourne would lose a game, there would be a star player who would really step up. Then they would win a game, and they would generally have 3 guys who are, high production guys who probably deserved it. You think of game 5 of this series, I had 3 Illawarra players because they won the game. I thought they won it convincingly, especially toward the end. And there were 3 guys who I thought produced at the level where it's like, yeah, you are the 3 MVPs of this game, or you're the 3-2-1. So that's the first thing. This thing it benefits stars, and it doesn't benefit depth. And that's why Delhi he was on a ballot for 4 of the games, whether it be at the top of the ballot for, I believe, game 3, which obviously so, or whether it was just sort of trickled through the ballot. He was. Whereas I'm pretty sure Dave Hickey only made it on ballots in 2 games, which was game 4 and 5. Now, again, like, this isn't how we should decide MVP. This isn't like the last 2 games were elevated in importance and significance. Yeah. And so we have to put stock into that. Again, I felt like as a voter, it threw us under the bus because it wasn't properly explained how this system worked, and people immediately went to blame the voters or whatever. And it's like, no, we were constrained to this very rigid system, and we have to vote within it. If we want transparency, which we do, then there's no way for us to rig the system. We can't get to game 5 and say like, hey, guys, like, let's band together and make sure we come to the correct decision. You can't have transparency or like the desire for transparency and this system at the same time. That doesn't work. And so from what I think the system has to change to, I'm good with a 3-2-1, but just let us do a 3-2-1 at the end of the series. And I think that eliminates the game by game sort of ups and downs and twos and fro's, and making, and a role player who steps up and drops a 25 piece and then doesn't show up again. That guy getting 15 votes in MVP race feels a bit awkward. But end of a series, I think, let us do a 3-2-1. You'll probably come to the correct decision at some point. And again, if you asked us, like, can we all band together and overturn it and pick David Hickey, we'd probably all say yes. That's not how this works, obviously. But in the future, I feel like from last season, where if Ellie hit a half-court shot and United wins that series, Jack McVeigh is still the finals MVP. So we all narrowly avoided that last season. We didn't avoid it this season. And I think it's reason to change it to what I think is same panel idea, 3-2-1 vote at the end of the series only.
Yeah, it's one of those typical things that if you, again, and I've been aware of it for years, but I had never really worried too much about it because normally it works out. But like most things, it's only a problem when it becomes a problem, and that's the situation we find ourselves in. And it is a little bit of a shame because, look, credit to Daly for doing that, but also, I feel bad for him that he had to do that because he did have an incredible series. And I also feel a little awkward for Dave Hickey because he was clearly like, well, what am I going to do with this trophy? I don't know what happened after that. And, much respect to both of those guys. So here's what I will say. If we assume next year that they're going to right their wrongs and they're just going to say, look, it's 3-2-1 at the end of the series, which we have to assume they're going to do. If they don't do that, they're stubborn beyond belief because that's just ridiculous. If it was a 3-2-1, I'm going to tell you right now who I would have voted for at the end of the series, because there's a guy that I think would have got my 2 votes that we have not really discussed at all. When you talk about the most valuable player to the series, the most valuable player to a team, 3 votes would have been Dave Hickey, no question. 1 vote would have been Matthew Dellavedova, and 2 votes would have been Wani Swaka Labullock, who did not get 1 vote at all in this system 3-2-1. He was significant on the offensive end. He was getting you 8 points per game on the offensive end during the regular season. He scored in double digits in 4 out of the 5 games, and he ended up shooting 10 for 15 from 3, and every single one of them felt big. Like, this was a big-time shot-making series for Wani. And then you factor in what he did on the defensive end. There was one thing that the Hawks could not allow to happen, and that was Chris Golding getting off the chain. And look, CG was big when they made that comeback in game 1, but overall for the series, Golding only 16.8 points. That's not enough. He had to be better than that on this Melbourne team. And he was 16 for 50 from the three-point line, 32%. And a big part of that was because he was being harassed everywhere he went by Wani Swakala-Bullock. So if you ask Justin Tatum, I don't know this for sure, but if you asked him the value of Wani in this series, I would have given him the 2 votes because he was just so big. And an underrated guy that just flies under the radar. No one really notices it. The stats aren't great, but his impact on this series was second only for me to Dave O'Hickey for the Hawks.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if I would give him like a 2 vote.
Yeah, but he wouldn't have got it because people just look at the box score. See, I'm telling you, he wouldn't have got the 2, but if you think about it, if you had time to think about it a little bit, I think it makes sense.
And look, I agree. In the same way that I gave Shea Ilya 1 vote after game 1 because of his job on Harvey.
Yeah.
Right. And it just so happens that in certain games, there are guys who are so outstanding from a, points production and all of those different perspectives that it's like they deserve the votes. And Wani he probably would have got like the 4th vote for a lot of games. But again, I agree. If you watch every game, the key to their defense, at least to start the series and over the course of it, was let's contain Chris Golding. And I thought he did as good a job as we've ever seen in an environment like that of containing Chris Golding. It was weird going into game 5. We hadn't had an offensive explosion from the Illawarra Hawks, like one of those explosions, and we hadn't had a Chris Golding game. And it seemed like we were bound for one of them. And I think we got that Illawarra explosion in the second quarter, which I think separated them a little bit. And I think they felt like they had a lot of juice after that, and they were able to sort of ride that wave to a victory. And we never got a Chris Golding game. And you give Wani Swakala-Bullock all the credit in the world for that. And then on the other end, the shot making was so important because he was being guarded by Chris Golding. And Chris Golding was always the guy that was going to come down and tag and help on drives and help on post-ups and things like that. And Wani Swakala-Bullock was the guy in the weak side corner or on the wing who was going to shoot that relatively open shot, and he had to make that shot. And it seemed like every time he made one, you could sort of see Chris's eyes go toward Dean Vickerman and think, how much am I helping off? Because it felt like reputationally, I guess over the course of the years, maybe you help off Wani Swakala-Bullock, but not that this season he's been a 40+% 3-point shooter. This is what he's been all season long. So this is what he is now. This should be a change of his reputation, that he's someone who you can't give open looks to because he will knock them down, especially from the corners. So making those shots, he had a lot of in-between shots that I thought they felt backbreaking for Melbourne United, because it felt like United would go on a run and Swaka would take Chris Golding off the dribble, hit an in-between shot, and it'd feel like, damn, like we feel like that's the shot we want to give him. But this is a really skilled player, and what is he now, a 4-time champion at 23, something like that, with a bunch of different teams, but also a starter on 2 of those teams. Like, he's doing some incredible stuff right now.
He is, and just remember, when he left Sydney to go to Illawarra and get a little bit of extra cash, it didn't start out great. They were probably expecting a little bit more from him. I think it's easy to forget how young he is. It feels like he's been in the league forever as well, playing a really damn important role as a starter when he was 20 years old. So, yeah, he deserves a lot of credit. He's got better as a shooter, looks like an experienced head in some of these moments where things weren't going great for Illawarra at times. There was times where they struggled. You mentioned the CG are looking over to Dean Vickerman, though.
One more thing on one, if that's okay. I remember,
yeah.
Smallest note, I remember when Jacob Jackomas first took over as head coach for the Illawarra Hawks, he told me that my number 1 priority is Wani Swakala-Bullock. We're going to take him to the Kings, and we want him to be part of this program. So I'll give the smallest morsel of credit to Jacob Jackomas for saying he's our priority. We want him, and they stuck through him, like you said, through the awkward first couple of seasons in Illawarra where he wasn't amazing offensively and he was fine defensively. They stuck with him, and now he's a legitimate player on this championship team. Credit to him.
Yeah, he is. You mentioned CG looking over at Dean and trying to figure out the Wani stuff. One thing that I remember still very clearly, it was in game 2 when you were starting to think already, man, Melbourne might just grab this by the scruff, take a 2-0 lead. And you remember very early in that first quarter where CG was really trying to get Wani fouls. Like, he was really looking for the fouls. Wani picked up his second foul, and CG was immediately looking at him and smiling. And that was when I was like, damn, Wani must be really like getting into this guy, because he was just desperately trying to get him off the floor. He did. That was the last time Wani found himself in foul trouble, though. So credit the discipline as well of him throughout the rest of this series. Just unbelievable stuff. I was going to say, before I want to get any stories you have as we wrap this up from being in the building and the post game and all that type of stuff. You mentioned the second quarter explosion. So here's the quarter by quarter scoring for this game. It's quite remarkable. So the first quarter, 26-26. The third quarter, 22-22. The fourth quarter, 32-32. So 3 of the 4 quarters were tied, except for that 10-point difference in the second quarter. That was the only thing that split these two teams, and obviously it was pretty good momentum heading into halftime. Yeah, what have you got as we wrap this up? I think we've hit, a lot of the big picture storylines, but you obviously saw a whole bunch of stuff that wouldn't have come through the TV. So, is there anything that stands out that you want to bring to the table?
Yeah, so, like, if we just sort of go through the game ends, obviously, everyone storms the court. There's a very, like, sweaty Tomahawk, the mascot. He gives me a hug. He is sweatier than people realize he is. Um, and then, yeah, I thought the crowd did try to redeem itself. I think when Chris Golding was first announced on the stage, there was a scattering of boos, and then I think before he started speaking, I think they started to cheer. I think there's like a tribalism that happens when you're in a crowd, and I think everyone realized, like, okay, well, let's appreciate the competitor this guy is, and he's in our building having to speak. That's not an easy thing to do. Um, and so yeah, he spoke. I didn't like the booing of Delhi.
Well,
Uh, up to them doing the decision.
well, that's what they say, but let's be real about what happened here, because I've watched it back a few times, and they were emotional, and they got carried away with the moment. But I'm not buying they were booing the decision, because then when Daly actually got up and he was about to speak, the booing got louder. So you can disguise it and say you were booing the decision. You booed these guys ferociously right throughout the series, but the series was done and you won. So it was, I thought it was poor. They will easily be able to say, no, 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 we weren't booing him, we were booing it. But then it got very awkward when Daly told you to be quiet and then handed it to Dave Hickey, and then you realize, oh, actually, we should cheer a legend of the game in Australia. So you can cover it up, but let's be real what it was. They got carried away, and it was a poor look.
Yeah, and I'll say this as well. I'll give credit to the United guys for a lot of those guys stayed out there and watched, which they didn't do last season. And like I don't care about that stuff, but I know a lot of people do. Yeah, a lot of those guys, those star players, were sitting there watching the proceedings. And yeah, some of them to speak, but they watched it all happen. Obviously Dean Vickerman was out there and his coaching staff. So a lot of those guys, I don't know if any of them were out there when Tassie was being presented with their trophy and things like that. But they were out there for the Hawks this time round. Um, and then, yeah, there are things that I cannot speak of. There, each team went to their respective gatherings. Basically, the Hawks hit the town, and Melbourne United, they had their gathering. They all came together. And I'll say that was like it was like a somber room, but it was like a very like reasonable room. It was a group of professionals who were like, "Damn, like that, this sucks." Just like obviously utter disappointment, but it wasn't like there was no not like a depressive nature to it. There wasn't a ton of crying or anything like that. They were just like very like stoic and like, "Damn, like that sucks. Like we should have had that one. We could have had that one, etc., etc." Um, but yeah, look, it's a really fun experience. And then the next morning, you sort of in Wollongong, there's like 3 or 4 cafes that you can go to that like that are reasonable, and you're gonna see guys. You're gonna see people there. Like I'll be having breakfast somewhere, and this is like in the past, you'll see like Hyungjung Lee would come through, and then Zach Triplet would come through. You just see guys. I was at a certain cafe. It's called Utopia, right? It's a favorite among all the Illawarra Hawks guys.
Fitting.
I was in there, and they're big fans. And then I hear the door open behind me. I get like prodded in the back by like a big stick. I turn and it's Sam Froling,
Hmm.
obviously on crutches with his family, and he gets like a round of applause from the owner or from the manager of the cafe, who are obviously huge fans that haven't seen him yet. I spoke with Sam. He gets surgery today. We're recording this on Tuesdays. He's headed to Sydney today. He's getting surgery, partial tear of his right Achilles. So to get that surgery, he's been told 6 to 9 months, obviously to prepare for the back end of that. But 6 to 9 months would put him at a return around January-ish. So that's not as I thought it'd be like a 9 to 12, and looking at the end of that range. So there's a good chance. There's a chance we see him next season. Obviously, he enters free agency. He hasn't made a decision there yet, but yeah, he'll get surgery. I don't know. It was just like a lot of celebration. Like it was cool to watch it in the home crowd. It was cool to watch Wynn Entertainment Center. The majority of the crowd stayed to celebrate with everybody. And yeah, that's it was a fun place to be. I hate that you don't get to experience these days.
Yeah, it's interesting though. You talk, and I just referenced the parochial nature of the fans, and I'm sure that there would be pushback to me, not loving.
It's the third stop of a pub crawl. That's what they are.
That's what I mean. So that's why, like, I can say that I didn't love the post game stuff, and you can frame it however you like, oh, we were doing this, we were doing that, but it is different with a town like that. And it's different with a town like Tasmania as it is to the Melbourne United guys. And it's not that the Melbourne United guys wouldn't get recognized if they go out, but you don't get to walk down the street. You all live relatively close. So walk down the street and there's two cafes and everyone knows you there and the town is behind you and the town loves you as well. So it is a different feel. It's what makes this really cool as well because, we see a lot of sports where the small towns that they don't get a chance. Like they can't compete with the other ones. So to see Tasmania last year and Illawarra this year, it's a feel good story. It's cool to see these small towns win the title and get to celebrate because we know, let's face it, you're going to have a Sydney Kings title or a Melbourne title or a Perth title. They're going to come. We understand that. And you don't know. It was over 20 years since the last time Illawarra won. We don't know when Tasmania will win again. So to see it back to back, I think is great for the league. And it's good to see the little guys punch into the top. Mind you, very, very talented roster of little towns.
But you know what though? If I don't have the numbers yet, I'm sure I hope someone will get them to me at some point in the next couple of weeks. But my guess is that for the second season in a row, at least from the numbers I've seen, I don't think this Hawks team will have gone over the cap. That's my guess, just from what I know. And if that's the case, that's really, really impressive. They didn't go over the cap last season. They were just under the salary cap. And I don't think Melbourne is like substantially over the cap either. I think they will be. I don't think either of those teams come close to Perth, Adelaide, who I assume will be at the top of that list. But I'm very excited to get this list and see just where the Hawks are because Matt Campbell, who credit to him for building this team, the balance of this team, getting the young guys in, nailing the imports. I think Darius Days was sort of hit and miss sometimes, but Trey Kell was an absolute steal of a signing for them. Sticking with Tyler Harvey, all that stuff matters. But yeah, he gets a directive from ownership to not go over the cap. It's Matt, you better freaking not go over the cap, or I swear to God. And so yeah, if this team has won a championship by not going over the cap, that just makes this even more impressive.
Yeah, awesome stuff there, and congrats to the Illawarra Hawks. We say that, and commiserations to our friends at Melbourne United. Now, as we look to wrap up this podcast, we'll have some podcasts through the off season, but we have plans to bring this back next year, bigger and better. Some different elements and just a level of professionalism that could blow the minds of our listeners and viewers. So that's our plan, but we will be around. But in terms of the weekly schedule, we're going to take a little bit of a breather here. Obviously, Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops running for a couple more weeks. We've got some free agency stuff with you coming up this week, I believe, this week or next week, Olgun. So make sure you check all that stuff out. Nothing But Net on ESPN. You can see it every week, and just the college shows at the moment, NBA. So there's that much content. It's ridiculous. But what I will say, Olgun, is I think everyone will be tuning in probably the first week of October next year for me to tell everyone who's going to win the title. Because from Tassie last year and Illawarra this year, it's not bad. Back to back.
Yeah. It's the only reason I didn't want Illawarra to win is because of this exact moment. Because you did it you were on the Tassie train all season long last season, and it took me a bit to jump on board.
Yeah.
And it took me a bit to jump on board with Illawarra. But it's every time it's the same thing. It's all right, can they put it together defensively? And over the back half of the season, they did put it together defensively, and that was the big change in game 4 with Will Hickey. I think Dan Greeter's minutes were awesome in this series too. But yeah, congratulations. You picked the champion 2 years in a row. Well
It
done.
was a little less joyous till last year with Tasmania, though, because Tasmania still felt like an underdog the whole way through. You know, we got to the playoffs here, and every man and their dog were picking Illawarra, and I was just like, I think I got lost in the shuffle that I was first. That's all I'm saying. You know, last year I had a bit more credit. This year everyone was on there, so I say, oh yeah, I've thought Illawarra all season, and everyone's like, oh sure, but I did. It's a fact. It's on the record.
But then the unfortunate thing is that they were the number one team all season
I
long,
know.
best offense we've ever seen. So there was a point where they were not the underdog and they were the obvious favorite from a certain point, and no one's gonna remember that you made the pick before that. So I'm like,
Hey, I will say this. I did get a text from the coach, and he did say, "You believed in us from day one. You always said we were going to win it." And I said, "That's right." Listener of the podcast, Justin Tatum. Good morning to you over in Australia, and I'm sure you're still a little dusty, like a lot of Illawarra fans. So this podcast might be a bit of a blur, but hello to you all, and congrats.
you know, I when I moved back to Sydney around Christmas time, I texted Big Joe, the manager of the Illawarra Hawks. He does a bit of everything. He does a bit of everything. He does like, as in when I say a bit of everything, he runs that team, right, logistically. And I texted him. I said, "Hey, I'm going to be around a lot more. I'm going to want to come to a lot of practices." And he says, "Like, good. We're going to win it this year."
Yeah,
And I'm like, "Okay, cool. That's good to know." And like that doesn't come lightly from Big Joe, because Big Joe's been around for a long time, and he wouldn't say that just flippantly. But it felt like you made a good decision moving back to New South Wales, because we're gonna win it this year, and it's good that you're gonna be around. And I think I might have been the only person in like the NBL ecosystem who was okay with Melbourne not winning Game 4. Obviously, I don't care who wins philosophically, but I was flying home to Sydney anyway. I live in Sydney, so I don't care. Everyone else had to, they had to leave Melbourne and fly to Sydney and then drive to Wollongong. Man, I get to go home. I do the drive. I don't live that far from Wollongong. I'm in South Sydney. So I enjoyed being a part of this. And I've been around this Illawarra Hawks team for so long, through like LaMelo and through the Jacobus years. And even before that, this team has gone through a journey. So it is cool to watch this team that still trains out of the snake pit, which is this like the dicky old gym, to go and win a championship. And it is a really cool story.
all right, that's the perfect way to put a bow on this one. So we'll wrap it up there. Hopefully, everyone's enjoyed it and had fun with us along the season. I know we get some good feedback and some good interaction on the social media and stuff. And as we said, we're not going away completely. We'll be around when there's different news and various chats, and me and Olgun will get together and fire up the old podcast. So keep the subscriptions on and notifications and all those types of things, so you'll see when we do have a show. But we're going to take a little breather. It's been a long NBL season, a really fun NBL season, and overall just awesome to hang out with you, Olgun, every single week. We're separated by a big ocean, but look at us every single week. We make it happen.
Thanks, man. We're not, our friendship isn't ending. It's okay. We'll be okay.
All right, though. All right, we'll leave it there. He's Olgun. I'm Kane. This was the Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Congrats to Illawarra. We'll speak to you all soon.